With the impending release of the next generation of consoles, 2005 was a year full of speculation and mystery. Capcom had risked plenty announcing one of their flagship franchises exclusive to a fading console in the GameCube. In early January, they finally dropped the long overdue title that many had wondered would even come out at all. Resident Evil 4 released upon the world and became an instant classic that redefined a genre, as well as set precedents that are still followed in the modern day. Today on Downloadable Content, we are going to discuss this generational title, Resident Evil 4.
Con alegría, con alegría.
And hi, my name is Spencer, and I will be co-hosting today's episode of Downloadable Content. Let's go around the table and let everybody introduce themselves.
Hey, I am Brian. I have yielded the primary host's chair to Spencer for this episode, so I'll get a nice break.
I'm Ryan. I have decided to join because, hey, Resident Evil is one of my favorite series, and it's like, why not join on this?
Hi, I'm the new guy. I've never played this game before, and I just beat it for this podcast. I'm Ronny.
That's good. I like that we have a nice smattering of experience with the game. That is always a nice way to have a good discussion.
Yep, I mean it's like one of the other ones we did recently, where it's like we had a range of people who played the game at launch, beat it, and others who are now playing it for the very first time, 15 years after it was released.
Right.
So, yes.
Yeah, because I'm certainly on the other end of the spectrum as someone who has played the game to the point where I now am a speedrunner of it. So definitely have both ends to discuss. But
I gotta say, with speedrunning, I guess there's a certain method that you use for speedrunning, because when I was doing a game playthrough of it, and again, it's just like, I don't know how you could do a speedrun, especially with certain traps and like how things go along with the game. And I guess we'll get into that as we go along further.
Yeah, no, totally. I can definitely give some insights on how that differs. There's not a lot of out of bounds in the game that gets taken advantage of, like a lot of other games in that era. But
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I kind of expect you guys to nail me to the cross on this episode, because I'm not going to be nearly as positive as you guys are, I think.
That's okay.
Yep. I got a few rants I'm going to go on about.
It's certainly not a perfect game, but
No.
there are parts of it that are perfect.
I will absolutely say I can see why it was important. I can say that.
All right.
So one of the things that I wanted to start with is how interesting the development cycle for Resident Evil 4 is. For those of you unaware, this began development for the PlayStation 2 way back in 1999.
I was going to say the whole history of the fourth Resident Evil game, not this necessarily, but all the games that could have been the fourth Resident Evil is fascinating.
Yes.
It's one of the most unique development cycles I've ever
because we have three released games that all were at one point Resident Evil 4.
And then one other game that wasn't released that just kind of, went to the, place the place in the sky for for
Yes.
nice builds, but that's it.
Wasn't the final game that we had for the GameCube over here? That wasn't even the original so-called developed game, was it? Was that like a completely different idea, or is that like ideas mixed together?
The three released ones, and I bet Spencer's going to go more into this. The three released games that were all RE4 at one point are Devil May Cry, Resident Evil 4, the current one, and Code Veronica.
Oh, jeez.
But yeah, so in '99, they handed the reins over to well-known now, but at the time was still not necessarily a fledgling, but a newer guy on the scene, Hideki Kamiya. This is the version that ends up becoming Devil May Cry.
Yep.
The development team, he wanted to do something very different for the series. Like that was something that's a consistent desire from the higher ups in Capcom. Like they wanted Resident Evil was stale by this point. Like don't get me wrong, all the games that came out after like 2 are good games, but they just came out too quickly and they didn't really like add or change.
Well, the big issue, Shinji Mikami, I actually have a quote from him on here. During an interview in 2014, said that the Resident Evil remake, the RE1 remake, was one of his favorite games in the series, but it sold poorly, and the reception of the Resident Evil remake is the reason that Resident Evil 4 and Devil May Cry were made the way they were. They were told to give more of an action focus to it, because they felt the reason the Resident Evil remake did poorly was because they focused too much on the the survival horror aspects.
I think it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, it doesn't help that they were pushing to be exclusive with Nintendo, and at that time, the GameCube, while being a great console, was not selling like a great console, and it made for poor timing in terms of sales. And then on top of that, like I don't even want to look at that era where like they were just like dropping like just game after game after game after game after game, just so many. It just like people just got bored with it. Like I just remember the time like loving Resident Evil 2 and like playing 3 and kind of liking it, and then Code Veronica came out and I'm like, oh my god, like this needs to stop sometime, like, right? Like, they can't just keep chunking these out and not doing anything with the series. So, yes, because of this...
Correct me if I'm wrong, the reason Code Veronica didn't end up as Resident Evil 4 was literally because of the exclusivity deal they signed with Nintendo, where they signed a certain number of core Resident Evil titles to them, but Code Veronica was already in development for another system. So they ended up doing Code Veronica as a spin-off title rather than making it the 4th game.
Well, I'm not as familiar with Code Veronica, but if I remember correctly, I could do a lookup real quick, but I think that it was originally exclusive for the Dreamcast.
It was a Dreamcast exclusive.
And that I don't think that really had anything to do... I don't remember Nintendo really wanting that as part of the exclusive Resident Evil release package.
Well, I think it was they couldn't like the Dreamcast and Nintendo GameCube were so different structurally. You really couldn't port that without having to start completely over.
Oh yeah, you'd be making an entirely new game at that point. Yeah, it's not like you would be going from like Xbox to PS2 or something like that.
So they just went, we're going to just take the 4 away from this game, and we're going to say it's a spin-off title, and we're just going to make a new game for 4.
So according to Lord Wikipedia regarding Code Veronica, and I'm going to read this verbatim, regarding the development. Quote, with the success of Resident Evil 2 in 1998, Capcom began more Resident Evil projects across multiple consoles. Code Veronica originated from an unsuccessful attempt to port Resident Evil 2 to the Sega Saturn. After producer Shinji Mikami and his team learned that they'd be unable to port the game without making a large sacrifice to quality, Mikami was asked by leadership to create something else for Sega fans, so development began on an original game. When Mikami was asked for more time to develop the game, he was told it would need to have a better technical quality, which made the Dreamcast a much more appealing system. Around the same time, a side story game for PlayStation starring Jill Valentine in the events leading up to Resident Evil 2 was being developed. This title was originally intended to be a spin-off, with the Dreamcast title intending to be the true sequel. According to IGN, Sony bartered for limited exclusivity on the Resident Evil 3 title, and thus the side story was branded as Resident Evil 3, and the true sequel was labeled a spin-off and titled Code Veronica.
Okay, so I got it mixed up, and it was earlier than I thought.
That is not anything to feel bad about. The Resident Evil franchise is hyper complicated in terms of releases, and
I know.
It's so hard to keep track of.
I am a quite large fan of Resident Evil. I have avoided 4 up until this point on purpose.
I'm glad that we were the ones that were able to light the fire under your ass to finally, because I know this was one of those games that you had bought years ago but never touched.
Yep. But the reason I never touched it was because I'd seen enough with other people playing the game or in videos and pictures and everything to kind of have a feeling of what my issues are going to be in the game. And my opinion didn't change a whole lot when I actually played it.
All right. Well, when we get to the negatives,
Yes.
which I'm sure.
I have some positives. I have 6 things on my positive list and then a page on my negative.
But I will say, I appreciate the fact that you played this game instead of giving up an hour in like you did from Metal Gear Solid. So I appreciate your suffering for this episode.
That game
one of the
was
things
rough.
that I'm actually gonna, and when we get to it, one of the things that I'm definitely gonna go into is like, I would also really focus on like a lot of the story aspects and also some of like the boss fights too, both the positives and the negatives of it, because I'm gonna be going through this like from the viewpoint of someone who actually just likes to do playthroughs of the games, and for people who haven't really even touched this before and don't really know what they're doing with it.
Absolutely.
Or you can have it back, Spencer.
Tangents. But yeah, so after they sent Kamiya on his way to turn the game into Devil May Cry, because while they agreed that it was a great game they had made, it was too much of a change. Like there was no Resident Evil in the game. So they were like, okay, we'll just reskin this as something new and go with it. So then they tasked Hiroshi Shibata, who I am not familiar with, to direct the next attempt at the build in 2002. This version is mostly gone. Like, there's not a lot out there on this. The only thing that's really established by this build is that Leon ends up being definitively the protagonist for the game. That's the one thing from this build that seems to have carried on into the actual game itself. This eventually gets scrapped as well, following a lot of the same issues that they had initially, is that they didn't think that it wasn't different enough. It didn't like change the series in a positive direction. It was just more of the same, and that's what the executives were trying to avoid. So then in 2003, we got the mansion, the Leon in the mansion build of RE4, which introduced the hook hand enemy that we're all familiar with if you were, paying attention to E3 news at the time, or happened to be there.
I remember Hook Man.
Yeah. So this build was very much like harkening back to like Resident Evil 1, with being more puzzle heavy and a lot more of the survival horror like aspects that 1 has more of in comparison to the other titles. Adding the hook hand guy and having Leon be it was either infected with something or he had like a power in him, like he had an ability from something else that they never really explain, obviously, because they never finished the build. But again, the top brass just didn't think that it had what it took. They're also having issues with Leon having. They were trying to have Leon have hallucinations, and the trigger. They were having trouble having the triggers work for when these hallucinations would begin. So they had to scrap their ideas early on, and they finally just had Shinji Mikami take over as director, and he took the third-person camera from one of the previous builds that was used only for combat purposes.
Could I butt in for one moment?
Sure.
Just for the people out there who might not know, Shinji Mikami was the director of the original Resident Evil.
Yes, thank you.
First game.
Yeah, he's a. Yeah.
So they brought the master back in.
Yeah, I mean he was still involved in all the previous builds, but at this point, which would have been 2004, he took over as the director, like, you know.
Yeah.
Specifically, as before he would have been more of the executive producer role.
We're just throwing around names, and I know some people listen to this may not be entirely familiar, so I'm
Sure.
just clarifying.
Yep. Nope. No issue. So yes, he takes over and establishes the third-person over-the-shoulder camera as a constant for the entirety of the game, and not just when you're shooting. And this breakthrough is, from what I've read, is what really solidified the game from that point, and let everything kind of flow through that. And the amalgamation, like the castle, has a lot of essence from the third build, and like I said before, Leon being the protagonist from the second build.
The castle is the moment where I finally felt like I was playing a Resident Evil game. When you got to the castle, it definitely was very evocative of when you go into the mansion at the very beginning of RE1, or when you get to the police station in RE2.
That's funny, because a lot of people feel like, from people I talk to, I don't necessarily agree, but a lot of people give that sentiment with the village. Like, they feel like the village section is the most Resident Evil, and as the game goes on, it gets less Resident Evil.
I was reading that online, and my experience was completely different. Like, we'll touch on it later on once we get to the positive and negatives. But for me, like, the village was the least, and my favorite part was the island at the end, which, from what I gather, was the part that people didn't like out of the rest of it. Like, if you had to rate the section of the game, not they didn't like it all, but that was their least favorite part of the game.
Yes. The reasoning behind this, so to explain it in a kind of close manner, the franchise gameplay is based around like three main, fundamental abilities. You have the survival aspect with the limited inventory, and both in terms of being able to hold it, as well as like there just not being a lot of items around, and you have to be, selective about what you grab and what you use.
Yeah,
the horror aspect,
resource management has always been a hallmark.
Yes. And then the puzzle aspect, whether it's like, this key unlocks this specific door, or you need this item to make this machine work, or, you need these 3 or 2 pieces of a thing to unlock this other thing. That like
we're going to make you play a chess game across 8 different rooms where you're going to move each of the individual pieces, and it's actually going to move it on the big chessboard in the middle. And you have to remember where each of the things are because you need to get it to checkmate to open the door underneath it.
Oh, God, yep.
Oh, and by the
If
way,
I told you that was from a real Resident Evil game, not a single one of you would be surprised.
oh, and by the way, you still have hordes of enemies to deal with while
Yep,
you're doing
that's
all
true.
of that.
Ugh. Certain enemies are worse than others.
You're being chased by a tyrant with a chainsaw. That's what this game's gonna have.
Oh, God.
That would be awful.
Or even better, the villagers that you shoot in the head and you think you kill them, but you had the dang parasite emerging from
That
them.
is that is in my positives. Most of my positives are going to be specific enemies that really felt Resident Evil.
So
And
speaking
that
to
right
that,
there.
speaking to that, the like you're saying, that moment with the Plaga,
Yeah.
the whole, like, the way that you feel in the village is just uncomfortable.
Very.
Like, you never feel overpowering. Like, you never, like, you're not like running in there Rambo style mowing through dudes. Like, you definitely have more power than they do, but it's not a level of power that's like magnitudes higher. Like, you can very easily get in trouble if you're not paying attention to your surroundings and your ammo. Like, do I need to reload? If one thing this game really takes advantage of is like 360 sound. Like, you being able to like feel where the dudes are behind you, because your camera is fixed. You can move the camera angle, but it's fixed in that spot, so you can't. You have lots of blind spots, and that, I think that adds to that kind of Resident Evil style tension that you get from the like older games fixed camera views, where it limits where you can see.
I'm gonna add a couple things in also with the village as well, and one thing is that when I saw the Twitch stream with Brian, they're kind of like 2 different funny things. The first one is that when you enter into the village, and like when you see all the hostile villagers, and then you just have the the cows like around there, just like, yeah, what's going on? I'm just here eating. Please don't kill. Please don't shoot me. I don't want this. So that's one of the things. And then the second thing that I always felt was just really funny is the sounds that the villagers make when you shoot them.
Yeah, no, the to say to the cow thing, I think it does a really good job of like selling to you that these people live here and like live their lives and had been living their lives up until very recently. Like, this isn't like some ghost town that's been like,
I just sat there at one point and watched as one of the women went over and was just shoveling hay or pitchforking hay.
Yep.
And just doing what they would do. And then they see you and become basically not zombies.
Yep.
I will say my favorite part of the entire game was the very, very, very end, where it gives you this picture book ending sequence showing that village before and how it became in silent pictures what we come into at the beginning of the game.
It's an incredible job of understanding what lore needs to be shown without spending the gameplay time doing it. Like, we all know that something like this happens as you're playing through the game, and if you're reading, like the case files and other notes that you're finding as you're playing through the game, giving you like little chunks of extra story. But
Now
then, like
we've been tangenting for a while now. You were trying to finish off the release of this game, weren't you? About 5 minutes ago.
I mean, technically, I mean that's basically what I wanted, where I wanted to go with it. Just talking about like how this game had like so many restarts, and little chunks of each restart was taken and added to the next one, and they kind of like a ball of lint basically just kept growing and growing until it became like something that was actually feasible for release.
Now,
and I think that this development cycle should be anyone's argument when they're like, oh man, a game's getting delayed, blah blah blah. Like, yeah, games get delayed and usually end up better for it.
yeah, a game, you won't remember how many delays a game had in 30 years. But if it's a classic game, in 30 years, you may still be playing it.
Exactly.
Like a bad game is bad forever. A good game is good forever. So if you need to delay it to get to that nobody's going to remember that delay if it ends up with a good game afterward.
Of
Of course, if you delay it 80 times and it's a bad game, that's gonna be very disappointing.
Well, that you get that no matter what. I mean, like every title has that risk.
I will say, this RE4 that we actually got, as much as I'm going to say negative things about it, is far closer to what I would have wanted than if they had continued going the Devil May Cry route. Because my big complaint is that this RE4 doesn't feel like a survival horror game. It feels like it wanted to be a summer action movie.
But that was always their intent. Like,
yes,
there was never a point in time where they were trying to sell us more of the old guard. Like, they wanted everybody to know that this game was going to be new and different, but still have some, like, the same.
Which is why I never picked it up. Which is why it took me so long to play, because I was a fan of the old Resident Evil games. I enjoy the survival horror genre, and I feel like RE4 was the death not just of survival horror in the Resident Evil series, but it was what led to the downfall of survival horror as a genre, period. And that's a bummer for me. To me, picking up this, if I'd picked it up at the time, it would have been like buying the next Street Fighter game, and it was a side-scrolling beat-em-up instead of a tournament fighter.
I mean,
I think that's probably a stretch.
I mean, you say that, but I mean, even though that, I very much enjoyed Resident Evil 4. I mean, even in 2005, when this game released, this game really, really was the first to split the fan base, because up until this point, you had 0, 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica, which followed a very similar, very formulaic.
And the RE make.
Yes. Yeah, I include that with 1, but yes. Which included a very sort of, they all had very much the same elements. They were all very formulaic, and I very much enjoyed that. I'm in agreement with you, Ron. I love that style of game. But also aware of the fact that when you have made, when you've made 5 or 6 games that play pretty similarly, it's going to eventually show up in your sales, and that's eventually what happens. So, I mean, I totally understand why Capcom felt they had to take the series in a radically different direction. Whether you like it or dislike it, that's obviously your preference, that's your opinion, but I felt that this game, yes, it was definitely a huge shift from what we had been used to, but I couldn't really see a way for Capcom to continue going as they had been for, the 6 or 7 years up to that point.
Get that. I get that. And not all the changes are bad. The over-the-shoulder camera, I think that's great, and it makes shooting much better. And there are several, there are things that I could point out that could have taken RE4 and made me not have complaints about it and still keep the different feel to it. And we'll get to that kind of stuff later.
Sure.
But when I say it wants to be a summer action blockbuster, I'm sorry, there's not a whole lot of justification you can have for the minecart sequence, or the giant Salazar statue, or Leon having a backflip dodge. Like, those don't really, like, those feel like it should be a different game. You could have renamed Leon and made this a different game, and nobody would have known it was Resident Evil.
I mean, I mean, yes, you say that, and but I mean, it had been 6 years chronologically from Resident Evil 2 to Resident Evil 4. He may have picked up a thing or two.
I know, I get that, and I'm not even comparing it to 2 there. I just mean a backflip dodge does not feel like it fits in the Resident Evil world.
Okay.
Or the fucking laser corridor. The tie-in to the movie.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, that's literally that's what that was. That was a shout out to the movie.
That
that's
was
all
that was
it
entirely
supposed to be.
that was entirely product placement.
Absolutely. Or the Del Lago, the boss of the lake monster, my least favorite fight in this game.
Oh yes.
Oh, that damn thing. Yeah.
The monster that is literally named of the lake.
Yes.
Yeah, the Capcom's Spanish was a little.
Or finally, I'll say my last piece of action movie bullshit. And actually, I'm gonna take back what I just said with Del Lago. That's my second least favorite. My least favorite fight in the game, not because it is a bad fight, but because it represents everything that I have a problem with in RE4. The freaking Krauser fight, which are basically superheroes fighting.
Oh yeah.
That's funny you say that, because that's like one of the definitive scenes in the game that like most people hark to as like one of the best parts of the game, especially that part of the island. That cutscene, the QTE cutscene, is like one of the like foundational like gossip talk parts of that game that like when the game was out and like people were playing it, that's the like scene like, oh dude, how many times did it take you to get past the barrel kick? Because fuck, that was like way too many for me kind of moment.
See, that's actually the first time I heard this, and you're far more into this than I am. When I heard people talking about RE4, a lot of what I heard, a lot of people talked about El Gigante. That was definitely something I knew about going into the game. Father Mendez. Yeah, he was someone I knew about going into the game. Honestly, my favorite things in this game weren't the bosses for the most part. They were some of the creative new enemies. I love the Garador, the blind enemy. Like that. Sorry.
No, yeah, he is the first time you find him is in the castle. He's locked away in a like basement prison.
Yep.
And the way they present him is so cinematically perfect. You like walk down the steps, and then like as you get closer to the door, a little cutscene moves the camera to like his face, and you could see his eyes are sewn shut, and he's like chained to the wall. But unfortunately, the switch is right next to him, and then you have to go pull the switch, and it makes for a very like I'm going to say this a lot. Yeah, exactly. Tense, uncomfortable, because you don't want to go upstairs, because if he follows you upstairs, then Ashley, is in play, because normally you would want to leave Ashley. You're not bringing Ashley down there with you. He even says at the door, he's like, "Oh, such a sturdy door. Maybe a prison."
Yeah, that's your hint, fucking hint.
Yeah. Well, no. The hint, fucking hint is when you're walking down. He goes, "Maybe I shouldn't take Ashley down here."
Yeah, that's your second hint, fucking hint.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this. If I didn't already know just from the shape of the room, there's a boss down here, and he's not quite a boss. He's a mini boss, but the right idea. But you could take that guy and put him in any Resident Evil game, and he would fit perfectly. He is He is one of the two things in this game that are just so perfect. That and the regenerators. They are the best new enemy in the game. I love them, and I wish we saw them more.
Honestly, those are my favorite enemy in any Resident Evil game. They are so stressful. I love the scenarios that they put you in to have combat with them. I almost wish that they give
music.
Yes,
they have their own theme when they are present. And it's just that sort of raspy.
I wish they used them more. Honestly, I wish they used them more.
I could totally see them being something you meet in the castle earlier on, but I understand why they held on to it, because it makes for such a crazy juxtaposition, because in the island you go from these like mobs of dudes that are like, you know, obviously trained in combat, like soldiers.
Yeah, one with a freaking Gatling gun. By the way,
that's way later, but yeah.
Oh, JJ.
And then
no, you fight your first Gatling gun guy before you get to the,
you're talking specifically about JJ. Okay, yeah.
I'm talking about the guy with the handheld Gatling gun, not the one with the
not the mounted ones. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I'll cover this a little later, but like the way that the gameplay progresses you in terms of difficulty, if you really think about that, it makes a lot of sense how they introduce stuff like JJ, the guy who has the hand Gatling gun. But like I was saying, the juxtaposition between having those instances where you have this like, you know, gunfire basically gameplay, and then you move into this like dark hospital wing with like no music at all, and then you just like, you know,
you move into Silent Hill?
Yeah, I mean, like it's that they understand that people like you are going to play the game and think like, oh man, there's too much action, and they pull you back with these scenes where they're, you know, taking you into the medical room where you find your first regenerator, or like
I love that you get to the regenerator before you have a way to deal with them. I feel like you said, I think it would be cool. It would have been cool if we had gotten regenerators rarely in the castle, and you had no way of dealing with them. You just had to avoid them, like old school style. And then once you get to into the hospital and you see how they're being made, that's when you get the way to finally face them with the thermal scope. And that would just, it would become such a bigger moment when you finally have a way to fight back.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier, like, I wish that they let you have more time without the scope, just from a, like, stress-inducing standpoint.
And this is what I mean by, like, there's small things they could have done that would have made this way more attractive to me. These are some of the small things that really could have ratcheted the stuff up without changing the feel they were going for.
I mean, no matter what, it's mostly nitpicking anyways, just because, like, it's not like this game has, like, major, you know, flaws in terms of, like, coding or how the game works.
Well, I mean, like, for me, I gave this game because I track all the games that I play because I have terrible memory issues, and I rate all my games because it helps remind me of what I liked or disliked about the game when I see that. And I gave this a 7 out of 10.
All right.
It's time for you to get the nails and the hammer and put it down the cross.
I mean, I think your fandom is kind of, you know, being overly applied, but that's still a fair score.
Well, let's put it this way: I have enough negatives on my list here that I think by the end of it, you'll understand where I'm coming from. You may not agree with it, but I think you'll understand it.
We will see.
Oh, that's right. There is one other thing that I wanted to mention too, and is this the first? I forget what the Resident Evil, if Resident Evil 4 is the first time that they do it, but when you eventually get Ashley, and the fact that not only do you have to fight for defending yourself, but also for Ashley, was Resident Evil 4 the first game in the Resident Evil series to do that, or
no?
Resident Evil 2.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have the kid.
You have Sherry.
Oh, yeah, Sherry, that.
Sherry.
Oh, yep, that's
It's-
right.
I mean,
it's-
arguably, isn't there a scene in Resident Evil 1 if you play Chris where you have to defend Rebecca? Or am I thinking of the remake?
I don't think you have to defend her in the same respect because Rebecca.
No,
is
it's only a short period.
Yeah, like I don't think it's if any. It's been a while since I played it, but if I remember correctly, she's just like kind of injured, but
Yeah.
not like
Yeah, Sherry,
She's-
I think, is the first one.
she's still
Oh, yeah.
capable. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's not the first time, but it's definitely they instead of it being like a part of the story and then it gets added into the gameplay as it is in 2. It's a part of the gameplay that like gets added into the story basically. Like they want you to have scenes with Ashley. They design the game around you having scenes with Ashley that you didn't have Ashley with before to like change the difficulty level of an area that you are already comfortable with.
Ashley was the one thing going into this game that I really changed my opinion on. I thought it was going to be awful. I did not
Yep.
have a problem with Ashley, either with her characterization or with
yeah,
or with her in game as a thing. Like maybe it was because I went in with incredibly low expectations for that character, but she was nowhere near as bad as I expected her to be.
I think even now when I play through Resident Evil 4, I think I die more times because Ashley gets in my fucking line of fire than just, her being carried off and,
I only think I've killed her. I think I killed her twice where she got in my line of fire in the game, but it made things like the El Gigante fight, the optional one where you can go one of both ways.
Yep.
I tried to go both ways. I completed the Ganado route first.
Yep.
Then I went to El Gigante, and I gave up because I wanted to kill the Gigante. I didn't want to just avoid him, and I couldn't do it with Ashley. She would die every time, no matter what I did.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just, Ashley is one of those characters that is just, oh no, why? Like, just, I know the mission is you have to save her. She's the president's daughter, so on and so forth. But my God, the damn girl does not know how to get out of the line of fire at all.
Also, she's a college student. I understood with no. I'm going somewhere with this. I understand with Sherry, but Ashley is a college student. There is no goddamn reason you couldn't hand her a gun and tell her to shoot the things that come near her. There's no reason.
The only redeeming part or redeeming scene with her in the gameplay is where after you free her from like being like locked up from the trap inside of the castle,
Yep.
where she actually has to escape from that part. And I thought she somewhat redeemed herself because it showed that she could at least handle her own trying to get away from like the monks and stuff like that. But
And
other than that, it's just like
That felt very Resident Evil. That felt very
Yeah.
old school.
To be fair, this game was originally assumed to be a GameCube exclusive, so to expect 2 people to be playing a GameCube together is probably pretty unrealistic from the developer standpoint.
Oh, I meant give her a gun and have the AI shoot at things. I didn't expect it to be co-op.
Oh, I think that might have been worse. Did you play Resident Evil 0?
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it more than this game.
I mean,
I
okay.
didn't actually do this, but one thing when I saw a video online, the best moment with Ashley is when you have her in Special Costume 2, where she's in full plate armor, and the enemy runs over, picks her up, and then falls over.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, she's also invulnerable to all forms of damage.
Yeah, I know.
Which-
I know.
Which is good because when you get her, she's one of those characters where she's like, you shoot her, like if she takes damage in the toe, she's dead, and oh man, she was so frustrating my first playthrough of the game, and
Maybe it was just I got lucky. She rarely got hit compared to I took 90% more damage than she did throughout the game.
Well,
About the only time I remember being a pain was the El Gigante fight.
Well, to be fair, the Ashley gameplay is designed around giving you more options, and thus, what you were doing might be different from what Brian was doing from a tactical standpoint, and could be giving more trouble. Say like one of you was putting her in one corner, and one of you was having her go to a different corner, and that was causing the AI to react differently accordingly, and getting worse setups.
I basically never. The only time I think I ever left Ashley behind was for the blind fight. I always kept her with me, and I played the game very methodically. I very much did the shoot them in the head, kick them to the ground, and then cut them up with your knife, or shoot them in the leg to knock them over, to lower the ones. I didn't realize how this game is not designed, but I played it like I would a regular Resident Evil, where I conserved ammo as much as I could. I played the game probably not the way it was meant to be played.
And that's the thing about this game. It's like you have a variety of playstyles. I mean, you were playing it like a classic Resident Evil, whereas you have the option in this game, since ammo is not necessarily at a premium anymore, you could go in there and just blow everyone away. So, I mean, that's one of the things I actually like about it, is that as opposed to the previous games where you really had to conserve your ammo, combat bad, this game you could have done what you did, or you could have done what I typically did, and it was just like, all right, here we go, got the shotgun, it's crowd control time. And
Yeah.
I will say, because this actually goes into it, there are 3 big things that affected my enjoyment of the game. That affected it feeling like a survival horror game, even an action survival horror. The first one, you just brought it up, is I never felt like I was ever short on any item in the game. In fact, I had to leave stuff behind constantly because my inventory was full, but not in a good way. In RE1, you had to leave stuff behind because you never felt like you had enough space. In this one, I guess I don't need another grenade. I have 4 of them right now. I'm not using them right now. I don't need that. I have 100 of every type of ammo. Like, I never felt like it still had the item management part of it, but that almost felt like it should have been removed from the game entirely, because there was no point to it. If they give you enough, you're never going to be out of stuff, then why are you even keeping track?
Well, for one, the strategy that you're talking about playing is a pistol-heavy strategy, and the game AI, when it comes to drops, will always give you more handgun ammo than the other ammos, and if you're thus only using the handgun, you'll be getting more ammunition than you're spending, unless you're very bad at shooting, which the game is designed to teach you how to shoot, both in the aspect of the specific areas of the body you can hit to give you extra QTE prompts, as well as the bottle cap missions in the later parts of the game, as well as the hanging targets in the village. So if for say you played it like Brian is describing, where you like sell your pistol and you don't even keep handgun ammo, you just toss it, because you can just use the shotgun and the TMP and then have the sniper rifle ready and have some room to just buy a rocket launcher and use it on that one boss you really don't feel like fighting this time.
I played this game the way the way it sounds like Brian did when I did Separate Ways. That's where I experimented a lot more with I used all the guns in the first playthrough, but very specifically where I felt like they were most useful. But in Separate Ways, I was switching between stuff a lot, and I'll touch on that later.
I mean, like I play the way you're describing, where I will spend no money until like very late in the game. Like I'll use the normal handgun, I will pick up the Punisher that you can get for free and sell that immediately.
Mhm.
I won't upgrade, and I'll get the the shotgun.
I did use the Punisher, but I didn't. I when I started the game, because I knew that I needed to finish it before the podcast. I didn't look up a guide, but I did look up Resident Evil 4 tips, and one of the things it said was to save your money to upgrade either the Red 9 or the Blacktail.
Yep.
For your primary handgun. So that's what I did.
Exactly, and that's basically what I do. Is because early in the game, barring the Dr. Salvadors, you can get through with just the handgun and your knife, and you'll probably be okay for the most part. Like, we'll talk about it on the other side, specific scenarios, but
yeah, rifle. Once you get the enemies that throw the dynamite at you, I'll do that.
Honestly, I'll tell you, I don't buy the original rifle model when I do casual playthroughs. I will wait until the semi-automatic rifle is unleashed in the castle before I buy a rifle.
Same.
But, again, that's what me and Brian were saying earlier. Like, you can play this game however you want.
I think the
open and free in that way.
Yeah. I think the only gun that I bought early in the game was the TMP, because you don't get it at all at any point free.
No, yeah. The only weapons you get for free are your starting handgun, the Punisher pistol. You can get the broken butterfly if you do some backtracking. You get one free rocket launcher, and that's it.
Yep.
I know we're running low on part one, but I wanted to mention, I said there were 3 things that really affect my enjoyment as a general things. The second, I know this is a polarizing thing. I understand, it is very much individual, but I fucking hate QuickTime events. I will never not hate QuickTime events. I've never memorized what buttons are what on a controller. So when they pop up, press these buttons on screen, I have to look down. I know what the buttons do in the game. That's how I remember them. But I don't remember the X button is this and the O button is this. I've never done that. So QuickTime events are the worst for me. I finally realized about halfway through the game that you can just press down all 4 buttons that are used for QuickTime events every time it pops up, and you will pass every time, because it doesn't parse the 2 that are unused.
Yeah, that's the speedrun strat. You just hold down all 4 buttons, and you're gooch.
Unless the prompt is the 2 trigger buttons.
No, you can do the 2 trigger buttons, and then the only 2 of the no, you don't have to do all 4. Only 2 of them are used on the controller.
Right.
The 2 trigger buttons, and then crap, I don't have my thing in front of me, and like I said, I don't remember the buttons, but the shoot button and the confirm button.
It's X.
On the traditional GameCube controller, it would be A and B, or the 2 shoulder buttons are the 2. There's
the
no
2 triggers.
Those.
I was doing it on the Switch Pro controller, and it was AX, ZL, and ZR were the 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, I for QuickTime events, Ron, I will agree with you there, because while that was Capcom did this funny thing. You see, they introduced QuickTime events for the first time in Resident Evil with 4. But and yes, the whole knife fight with Krauser, that was probably where I died the most on my first playthrough, because not only did I not know what was coming, the prompts were not the same every time.
Yep.
So if I died because I didn't hit XA fast enough, I would go into that sequence again, expecting XA to pop up, but then it's like, oh no, now that same prompt is now the trigger buttons. Yeah. And it threw me. I'd figured out, I don't remember exactly what point in the game, but I figured out that you could just press all 4 of them
before I fought Salazar. So by the time that I had the Krauser fight, I already knew that you can just jam on all 4 and you're fine.
And that's perfectly fine. But where I was going with that was that I too was not a fan of the quick time events. I will give you that one, because then in later games, especially in 5, Capcom fucking abuses the privilege.
That is not RE4's fault. How dare you? I
feel like they abuse it in this game.
I've never understood that mentality of like blaming RE4 or any game for things that happen in later installments of that series. Like
I'm going to be playing through all the Resident Evils again. This was out of order. I'm playing through them in order. So I'll see how I feel, but at this point, I like RE4 and RE5 the same.
Ugh.
Yeah. And
RE4 is my least favorite good Resident Evil game. So not 6, not the Umbrella Chronicles or Dark Side Chronicles, or frickin' God, why can't I remember the name of the Resident Evil Survivor?
Yep.
But out of the good games, it is my least favorite.
But so that was your second, the QuickTime events, and your third?
And my third is what I think ruined this game as a survival horror, even adjacent game. And that is that the enemies drop loot, which encourages you to kill all of the enemies rather than avoid them. It leads to how you have way more supplies than you're ever going to need. Like, it literally incentivizes you to do the things you shouldn't be doing in a survival horror game.
But this game has never been a survival horror game. It's never been advertised as a survival horror game.
Yes, it absolutely did, and I can show you. The back of my frickin' box says a new survival horror game. It was advertised as a survival horror game at the time. At this point, we can look at it and go, it's an action game, but no, they absolutely advertised it as a survival horror game, an action-heavy one, but it absolutely was done as part of that genre.
I mean, I would definitely disagree with that, just based on how they advertised the game leading to release. The demo that they produced showed that there the game was completely new and fresh and different. There was no oh, this is more of the same. There was never that point where they were trying to this is the same kind of gameplay. No, they wanted it very clear from the start that if you were buying this game, you're not getting the same kind of experience you got from the older Resident Evil games.
No,
plus, wouldn't this game also be sort of a bit also an introduction for possibly the Resident Evil series as well, for people who had never played it before? Take people who just don't have any of the PlayStation or whatnot, and they only have the GameCube. This would be their absolute first Resident Evil experience, and I'll bet you one of the reasons why they did all the loot drop is because otherwise they wouldn't realize that it's so easy to die in the Resident Evil series. And plus, if you're not very good with the survival horror for shooting, you could lose your ammo really easily if you're not very good with aiming and stuff. So that's probably also one of the reasons why they did it that way.
I was gonna say my back of box says that it says fast-paced action is one of the bullet points, but it also calls itself survival horror right at the very top.
Well, sure, because it does have the elements of survival horror in it, but
you were just saying it wasn't. That's why I was saying.
Well, no, but I get what you're saying. But what I'm trying to convey is this. Them saying survival horror on the back of the box doesn't mean that they were telling you that this is going to be Resident Evil 2.5 or something like that.
I wasn't saying that. That's not what I was saying. I was saying that loot is antithetical to survival horror games, and you said it is not a survival horror game, and I went, well, that's not what my advertising tells me. They could have just said it was an action game. They didn't. They specifically called it survival horror. And I'm not just taking off of Resident Evil. It can be different. Silent Hill and Resident Evil are both survival horror games. They're very different games. A lot of what they did in this doesn't go against survival horror. The over-the-shoulder one, the easier firing, the not fixed camera, those were all fine. It's things like the fact that they drop loot, or that there's so many items and ammo in the game that there's never a reason to be nervous you're going to run out. Those are things that affect it as a survival horror game, period, of any survival horror game.
No, I would disagree, because they change the point at where your anxiety is coming from. Instead of your anxiety being about your item management and your lack of ability to have combat, they change it to constantly shifting sceneries where you don't know where your enemies are coming from. More intelligent enemies that not only work together, but also can react to things you are doing and change what they are doing in response, as well as the sections of the game where you actually are limited in some way, shape, or form, whether it's having Ashley with you or the terrain being at an advantage for the enemy and not yourself, i.e. the gondola sequence and on your way to Mendez. So they take that survival horror tension and they have just changed the avenue at where you get the tension.
I guess it didn't hit. I guess the way they were trying to do it didn't hit for me, because I had no tension for 85% of the game.
Plus the boss fight with the damn fish in the lake too. That's probably one of the biggest tension things in Resident Evil 4, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, we'll cover it on the other half a little bit more detailed, each boss and all that. So I don't want to get too deep into each one specifically, but like,
there are a couple scenes that had a lot of tension. There's the regenerators had tension. That scene going down had tension. There's a couple places, but the majority of the game had no tension for me.
All right, then that's to each their own.
Yep.
Exactly.
To each their own. I mean, every game is going to hit every player differently. So,
of course, I mean, the when you play it is always relevant. What experience you have with the series beforehand is also relevant. Yep. So there's,
I guess my point factors. I guess the point for me was, these are the three things that took the tension away that a typical Resident Evil would have for me, and didn't put back in tension in any way that really hit me.
Okay.
Other than a couple set pieces. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how the fuck did the merchant create a shooting range in the enemy stronghold? Twice!
He's also infected. If you look at his eyes, he's got the same red tint that the other villagers have, and Leon gets as well. So he is also infected with the Plagas.
I understand. I'm just going. He's in Saddler's frickin' basement in the frickin' island with the one. He's in the castle with one. Like,
game logic. That's all we need to say. Game logic.
I get why the merchant is a meme at this point from playing the game.
I will say now you understand.
I will absolutely say he destroys my suspension of disbelief entirely, but I'm not even going to complain too much about him, because he was worth it for the memes.
I mean, Resident Evil doesn't really ever try very hard to not do that anyways. Like the franchise.
Suspension of disbelief?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. Like,
they have pretty ridiculous things going on in every game.
No, I agree. But like, I will talk about this from a lover of sci-fi fantasy, in all genres. Suspension of disbelief is heavily based on what you're playing, what you're doing. You have different buy-ins for a different game. What you would suspend your belief for in a Call of Duty game is not the same as what you would suspend your disbelief for in a Halo game. The merchant is not something that, like, it definitely feels out of place with what Resident Evil's been in the past, but not even just that. He feels out of place in what Resident Evil 4 is. But he's so awesome that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, he's kind of like a necessity, basically, for what you go through with everything, because, again, as you continue through the gameplay, the enemies get harder to beat, the terrain gets trickier to go through, and then also the item, you start needing a lot more, like, health and other stuff like that, and the upgrades and stuff. He's weird to have in the game, but at the same time, you need him in the game.
That's why I said I'm not going to complain that much. He strains my suspension of disbelief, but he's not a bad thing.
No.
And also, it makes it funnier when you know that it's the same. The merchant is the same voice actor as Leon, so it's like, oh, Leon's selling weapons to himself.
Oh, so we got a time travel story going.
Oh, I did not know that.
No, it's multiple personality disorder. All right.
Oh, okay. I thought that maybe I missed the time travel machine in RE6. That game was so over the top ridiculous.
The time travel comes
RE4.
The time travel is from another Capcom franchise. It's from the end of Dino Crisis 2.
Oh, you mean Dino Crisis in Space?
Oh no, that was 3. 3 was Dino Crisis in Space. So, but yes, the merchant is so lovable, and I'm just going. I mean, yeah, a total suspension of disbelief is like, how is, like, Sadler and the Salazar and all of them are focused on Leon and Ashley and Luis and Ada but, like, how the fuck did they get this guy who has an armory right under his nose?
How is he not the one going after Sadler? He has many rocket launchers.
Just think of it as if he's basically a Spanish Drebin, and then it'll just make perfect sense. For those of you familiar with Metal Gear Solid 4.
Merchant, can you inject those nano machines to get rid of these plagas? Thank you.
I was gonna say, if we just had enough money, we could have just bought it from them. Would have been fine.
But of course, plot.
Yeah, we're now a little over an hour now on this first half, so that's your time marker.
But yeah,
probably a good time to take a break.
Yeah, I think we did a good job of covering the general feeling of the game and all that. So on the other side, we will do a more intricate breakdown of each of the sections of the game, going through the gameplay, just to talk and feel and the like.
I will try and keep my tangents brief with it, but there are definitely a few areas where I'm going to be going on a tangent with that.
It wouldn't be it wouldn't be an episode of downloadable content without them.
No, exactly. If you are looking for that kind of content, you came to the right place.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with that, we were going to throw in some music, as is our custom, and when we come back, Spencer will once again yoink the host chair. We'll dive in. So you're listening to the 15th anniversary retrospective of Resident Evil 4 here on Downloadable Content. We'll be back.